everyone. Welcome to SJ Weekly. I know I said last week, on last week's SJ Weekly, that I was getting back to doing videos, daily videos, working on things, and then I didn't post a thing for a single week. I figure I should probably talk to you guys about it, at least a little bit. I've taken to using the intro of SJ Weeklies, aside from coffee slurps, to basically talk about channel news, if there's anything like that, because I think this is kind of becoming like a hub for the channel, this series. I don't necessarily want to use this as an excuse, and it's definitely unacceptable on my part, I think, to let things slack this much compared to my my New Year's resolution. But just to come right out and say it, a friend of mine, well, not really a friend anymore, like an acquaintance from my first go at university, so like before 2010, I recently found out that she had killed herself. And we weren't especially close. Like, we were always friendly whenever we spoke, and I haven't spoken to her in about 8 years. But it affected me more than I thought it would. It's not like there's a major grieving process, like when you lose an actual close friend, or a partner, or a family member or something. But it did bother me, because I think when you're at around 30 or a little bit older, you do have, like, several stages of your life behind you. And each of those stages have their own friend group or acquaintance group. And then when you bump into them later in life, you're always friendly, and you're like, oh, hey, it's good to see you again. But there's always, one, an expectation that you don't see them that often, so you do want to catch up. And two, that they're not important to you, but they're representative of a time when they were important to you. It's kind of a hard thing to describe. There's always this feeling that people that you've left behind will be around, and that maybe you'll bump into them in a few years and you can catch up. And sometimes you have to deal with the fact that that's just not the case. Anyway, long story short, it did bother me more than I thought it would. But at the same time, I also know that that's kind of a shitty thing to do. Like when a tragedy strikes or something happens, then you use that as an excuse to, be slack on your responsibilities. So, I'm sorry about that. The other side of it, though, is that, frankly, I probably wouldn't have been too entertaining had I actually made the videos. You come to this channel to be informed, or to be entertained, or to have a good laugh at some of the stuff that I dig up. And I just don't think it would have been my best content. That's not to say I didn't spend the time productively. I still streamed games on Twitch, because that is just kind of a visceral love for me at this point. I only get like 20 or 30 viewers, but being able to talk to people who consistently watch my content, it always lifts my spirits. And playing games with friends has always just been a great love of mine. So that stuff, really, really cheers me up when I'm down. And also, I spent a lot of the time integrating some new equipment into my recording studio, and that actually took quite a long time, much longer than I thought it would. So I haven't been slacking. I've been doing stuff. The daily videos are going to return tomorrow. And I'm sorry for the absence, especially so soon after I said I wasn't going to have an absence. But speaking of video games, let's go to our first article on Hard Drive. Huge Earthbound fan excited to play it for the first time. Now this article kind of speaks to me because, one, Earthbound is my favorite game of all time. I don't know if you've noticed, but the background art I use in some of the short videos that Ritualist made has Earthbound in the Super Nintendo. Secondly, I know that this is a joke article, but there are actually a lot of people on the internet like this, who truly claim to love Earthbound because of all the strange things it did to video games back in 1995 or whenever it was that it released, but have never actually played it. They're simply going on word of mouth. For those of you who don't know, Earthbound kind of exists in a very strange sub-niche of video games, where they're extremely hard to play, they don't hold your hand at all, they're quite ruthless, they're honestly kind of shoddily made, but they have a lot of love and charm in them. If you want equivalent games that might be considered similar to this, at least on those metrics, you have stuff like Deadly Premonition, you have stuff like any of the games made by Suda51, you have Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. Some people might consider Alice Madness Returns, the Alice games, in this camp as well. Basically just quirky games with a lot of soul that are duct-taped together, and you really have to be willing to play them on their terms. And the internet is full of people who claim that these are their favorite games even though they haven't actually played them, they just like them in theory. And thirdly, and here's why this is in this video, a lot of those people are also SJWs. Earthbound, for some reason, really attracts an SJW fan base, probably because the characters in Earthbound are like between 10 and 12 years old, and it's like going on a childish adventure. And most SJWs are either children themselves, or they're adults who have just basically failed to mature. Die-hard Earthbound fan Chris Strelkowski is beyond excited to finally play the 1995 Nintendo RPG for the first time this afternoon, according to close sources. The 28-year-old Berkeley native runs the Tumblr blog Mother May I, a site dedicated to the 16-bit game. His love for all things Earthbound extends beyond just the internet, with posters, art, wall scrolls, and more adorning his apartment. I do have a small collection of Earthbound paraphernalia myself, but the difference is I've played through Earthbound dozens of times, and I actually love the game. It's basically a crime this game went unnoticed when it was released, Strelkowski said. He then launched into a long monologue about how he wished he had known how important the game would become for people looking for a quick reference point on which to hang their retro bona fides. Yeah, see, I can actually tell a story of when I rented the game for the first time when I was a kid. I'm not just making shit up to have retro cred with the SJW side of gaming. I remember hearing about how Blockbuster was selling them for $5 a pop in huge piles, Strelkowski said, referring to a story he heard on a 2016 episode of the Retronauts podcast about the game. Imagine how awesome that would have been to pick up a bunch of those copies on the cheap, especially for a game themed around an idiosyncratic portrayal of Americana and Western culture, subverting popular role-playing game traditions by featuring a real-world setting while parodying numerous staples of the genre, he added, quoting the Wikipedia description nearly verbatim. If you ever encounter one of these people in the wild, and you ask them why they like Earthbound, that is basically what they'll say. They'll say that it's because it's an RPG that parodies Americana and uses the parody to flip things on its head. They'll probably even say deconstruct at some point if they're sufficiently postmodernist enough. He had a lot to say about the way the game was marketed in the United States, how the bizarre scratch and sniff cards included with the strategy guide may have turned off consumers, but little to say in the way of gameplay mechanics or particular characters from the game that spoke to him in a way that might help explain his obsession, with one exception. I definitely stood in line at GameStop for the exclusive NES Amiibo. I'm honestly one of the biggest Mother fans there is, which is why I can't wait to finally try it out on my Super NES Classic. Why haven't you emulated it? I know this is a fake story, but why haven't you emulated it? Anyway, this article is basically just one for me. It's a personal treat I decided to toss into to today's bunch. It's actually probably time for my yearly Earthbound replay. Yes, I do those. But here's our retard of the week. Owen McDonald, socialist, he/him. I don't think you need to include the pronouns, like you're pretty clearly a he/him. Remember, opposing abortion makes you a proponent, unwilling or not, of the far right, patriarchal control of women's autonomy, the degradation of bodily autonomy, pseudoscientific ideas about life, erasure of LGBTQ people via cisnormative gender ideas, and pregnancy. There's no compromise or leeway. If you're going to go around bad-mouthing abortion, spreading blatantly false and incorrect information, actively campaign for the removal of human rights, you are contributing to fascism. Okay, how many things do you think we can find wrong in just this tweet? I did a video on abortion about a year ago in which I described myself as pro-choice, and I'm still pro-choice. I went through the pro-choice and pro-life arguments as best as I can, and the conclusion I came to was basically that while abortion is terrible, it is the lesser of two evils. But let's go down the list here. Okay, so opposing abortion makes you a proponent, unwilling or not. That's the first problem, isn't it? Because you could be somebody who is, pro-life, but otherwise like a centrist, or like a center-right person, maybe even a center-left person, I'm not sure. But like, you could be a centrist who opposes abortion, and otherwise like has completely centrist or center-left or center-right political policies. That doesn't make you far-right. Moreover, I've noticed how the far-right has basically replaced the alt-right as the insult of choice. And really, the far right isn't great, but it's about as bad as the far left. Like, the far left should be just as much of an insult as the far right. But this is basically saying that if you oppose abortion, all of your other political opinions don't matter, you're just far right, whether you like it or not. Which is ridiculous, obviously. Patriarchal control of women's autonomy. That's the second thing. The problem with that is that there is definitely a pro-woman argument to restricting abortion. There's actually a significant wing of feminism that is anti-abortion, believing that it's anti-motherhood, and that legal abortion perpetuates an uncaring male-dominated society. Anti-abortion feminism basically believes that abortion allows women to be exploited. And it's kind of hard to argue with that point of view, isn't it? Keep in mind, I'm pro-choice. I want societies to provide abortion because I still believe that it's better than the alternative. But to believe that all arguments against abortion are simply all about the patriarchy is completely ridiculous. The degradation of bodily autonomy. This is the one that I probably agree with the most, but again, it's still not that simple. Pseudoscientific ideas about life. Yeah, I don't know about that. Like, this is definitely his weakest point. Independent life beginning at conception makes a fair bit of sense. In fact, it's probably more pseudoscientific about pinning where life begins at various arbitrary stages of fetal development, or on a person's birthday. Like, those things definitely do not make sense at all. Erasure of LGBTQ people via cis-normative gender ideas and pregnancy. I have no fucking clue where he's going with this. Most LGBTQ people, they can't have kids. You can do your best to impregnate that trap all you want, but it's just not going to happen. She's not going to get pregnant. But then here's where things go even crazier. Remember, he says opposing abortion, right? Opposing it. Down here he says, if you're going to go around bad-mouthing abortion. Well, opposing it and bad-mouthing it are two different things, aren't they? For example, I support abortion rights, but I can still badmouth it. I can still say it's probably a bad thing to do. Like, if you have to get an abortion, go ahead and get your abortion. But shit, man, like, maybe you should prevent yourself from getting into that position in the first place. Maybe that's the real solution. Maybe you can support abortion rights and still think abortion is a bad thing that you should really only have to go through as a last resort. So no, bad-mouthing abortion doesn't mean that you contribute to fucking fascism, of all things. Let's move on to the Asian Shaun King. Democratic congressman says he's an Asian trapped in a white body. Oh, so you're a boiled egg then, I guess we would call you. A white member of Congress said Wednesday that he regrets offending Asian people after he reportedly said he is an Asian trapped in a white body. Well, why is that offensive? I mean, Rachel Dolezal considered herself to be a black person trapped in a white body. Shaun King, Talcum X, is very clearly a black person trapped in a white body. Transracial is the exact same logic as transgender. So what's the problem here? People would only take offense to this if there was actually something for a white man to gain by transitioning to a non-white race. And if non-whites really are treated that poorly in the United States, there wouldn't be anything to gain, so why are people complaining? I regret if my specific remarks to the national API community on my full absorption of their concerns caused any offense, the congressman said in a statement issued Wednesday. His office added that the comment was in reference to what his Japanese-American wife sometimes says about him. To be fair, this is actually somewhat common if you're a white person dating an Asian person, because I did just that. I've had 2 Asian girlfriends. And there is some pressure to be like an Asian when you're dating someone like that. And I mean, this obviously is different from person to person, but in my experience, one of them definitely wanted me to act like an Asian guy, and I did for a while. And then one of them didn't explicitly say it, but there was still some subtext there. And I think that's just what you have to deal with when you're dating someone cross-culturally. You kind of have to adapt to your partner, and your partner kind of has to adapt to you. That's how it is in all relationships. But when it's cross-culturally, there's a bit more adaptation that has to take place. That's not necessarily negative. That's simply how it is. And absorbing some cultural values or something is just going to be part of maintaining the relationship. And it really should go both ways. But again, because the personal is political in all things social justice, how these two people navigate their relationship through life is now racist, I guess. And speaking of racist, here's an article from Arrow Magazine. Why there will not be a beige future. Skin color, genetics, race, and racism. The beige future is something that both social justice warriors and the alt-right talk about a lot. White identitarians are extremely worried about white people disappearing. You know, they chant, "You will not replace us." They talk about the beauty of the white woman, you know, shit like this. Meanwhile, SJWs, you know, rub their hands gleefully at the ideas of demographic shift and talk about how in 1,000 years everyone's just going to be one race. But if I understand the contents of this article correctly, the future that both of those groups predict will not come to pass. A monk named Mendel was experimenting with the breeding of peas and inferring from them that inheritance exhibited precise and systematic patterns of transmission from parent to offspring. His laws of segregation and independent assortment. Every generation, genetic variation reassembles itself in equal parts from each parent, as genetic variants mix and match in dizzying arrays, some resembling those of previous generations, and others startlingly new. Mendelian inheritance held the key to resolving a major problem for the theory of adaptation through natural selection. This process required heritable genetic variation, and pre-Mendelian theories were either deeply wrong about the details, or they made predictions which would have meant that all of that variation would have disappeared within a few generations. Mendelian genetics is one of those systems of understanding our world that is at once simple and elegant, and yet counterintuitive. The average human, using common sense philosophy, observes that the offspring of two parents are a mix of the characteristics of the parents. This is correct as far as it goes, but from this many assume that characteristics are being blended together. This is not what is occurring. Rather, configurations of genes lead to the characteristics. Genes are discrete units of heredity. They do not blend, but preserve a full range of potential variation from generation to generation. Variation does not disappear because the genes do not disappear. They rearrange. What's basically being said here is that when, for example, a black person and a white person have a kid, the kid is going to be some type of beige skin color most likely. And people who think that the human race is going to be one large beige race in the far future believe that when white genes and black genes mix, you get a beige gene. But that's simply not the case. What actually happens is that the white genes and black genes stay together, but they're still separate, which increases the range of variability, but does not preclude either end of the spectrum. Physical traits that are part of one race or another can still randomly appear among the population. Looking forward into time, the science of genes tells us that the full range of human physical expression will still exist, even if the fractions change, because the underlying genetic variation will persist. Some people will be such that we recognize them as white or black or Asian. Many more will be unrecognizable combinations thereof. Science tells us that the beige future will never arrive, because there are no genes for beigeness. Beige is simply one expression of variation among many. So, hypothetically, if every single person were to intermarry with a different race, and that were to continue for multiple generations, if I'm reading this correctly, the likely scenario in the future is that if you have a kid with somebody, the kid might pop out with a wildly different display of characteristics than you or the parent because you have all of these different racial genes inside of you. And we know that because it already happens now. Many peoples that we consider unique, distinct, and primal are in fact genetically novel, the product of great mixings in tribes and nations long gone. Northern Europeans, the native peoples of the New World, and South Asians are all the consequences of ancient mixings between profoundly different peoples. The dream of the beige future obviates the need to emphasize the moral and ethical aspect of the way we organize societies, in both its urgency and its difficulty. The dream is that science and the march of history will magically make the problems of racism disappear because racial distinction will disappear. The fact is, genetics doesn't suggest any such thing. And there you have it. No beige future. What will likely happen is that there will be new and different racial makeups, somewhat alien to the ones that we know today. But no, it won't be a situation of everyone looking the same. That's just not how the genes work. Let's end it on something funny. Family Guy will phase out gay jokes. Really? So there truly is a war on comedy then. Some of the things we felt comfortable saying and joking about back when the show started, we now understand is not acceptable. No, you didn't come to an understanding. You just saw how the wind was blowing with social justice warriors kicking up a fuss anytime somebody said something that they disapproved of. This is the same thing as The Simpsons phasing out Apu because he's an offensive racial stereotype. The point of the character is that he was a racial stereotype, and he makes fun of people from India. But you know what? One, that's been the fucking joke for 25 years. Have you guys only just figured it out? And two, even though he's a stereotype, he's not offensive in the slightest. His character is one of hard work and self-sacrifice for the betterment of his family. Even though that is stereotypical, it's still positive. He's still a role model, even though he's kind of goofy. And honestly, the best role models are kind of goofy. If you look at a show from 2005 or 2006 and put it side by side with a show from 2018 or 2019, they're going to have a few differences. Some of the things we felt comfortable saying and joking about back then, we now understand is not acceptable. If a show has literally been on the air for 20 years, the culture changes. And it's not us reacting and thinking they won't let us say certain things. No, we've changed too. The climate is different, the culture is different, and our views are different. They've been shaped by the reality around us. So I think the show has to shift and evolve in a lot of different ways. Will this be another instance of get woke, go broke? Is this another example of people who in their teens or 20s were freedom-loving hippies who wanted to say or do anything, and now that they're in their 40s, they want to restrict everyone and everything and start censoring people and doing away with things they disagree with? That does seem to be how it goes, doesn't it? I mean, in previous generations, they used religious conservatism as their excuse. This time they're using social justice. But it's the exact same thing. Now that they're older and they've had their fun, they want to start censoring things. Think of how many offensive characters there are in Family Guy. Think of how many offensive characters there are in The Simpsons or in South Park. The social justice net will continue to widen. There will be more things that these joyless authoritarians will not joke about themselves and will actively try to prevent other people from joking about. In my opinion, Family Guy isn't phasing out gay jokes. Family Guy is just phasing out. Anyway, that does it for me, guys. Thank you very much for all your patience with me. I will definitely be back tomorrow with another video, for sure this time. I'm streaming tonight on my Twitch channel. I'm looking at the new No More Heroes game, Travis Strikes Again. I'm a big fan of Suda51's games, if you haven't been able to tell so far. And his new one came out this weekend on the Nintendo Switch, so my roommate and I are going to check it out. So please drop by and say hi if you are so inclined to do so. It'd be great to see you there. Have a good day, guys. I love you.